Hey everyone, quick question before we start. Would you ever walk alone through a dark forest at midnight? Let me know in the comments. And if you love scary stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. I know that immoral doesn't quite cover it. It wasn't as if I woke up one morning and decided that this Thursday was the day I'd roll out of bed and become a loser. I didn't pull on last year's sneakers and make a pact with myself that my bank account would triple because I'd become a ghost hunter con artist, slathering my endless lies with snake oil. But that doesn't really matter. Karma caught up with me in a big way, and it was well deserved. We'd found a small niche online, nothing that would make headlines, but we made our money through donations and, of course, the cold, hard cash from the people whose lives we drained. I won't bore you with fine details, but we had ghost-hunted 19 houses in the rural outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, before we reached the Blackwood family. With each house, we bought more equipment to lend our ghost-hunting business credibility. We transformed creaking floorboards into demons, leaky pipes into supernatural activity. It was fun, until it wasn't. I had never met a family like the Blackwoods. The other families were young couples scared of whistling winds, or elderly singles desperate for proof that their homes weren't haunted by vengeful spirits. It was simple muscle memory. But the Blackwood family, God, they were terrified. Young parents with 2 children and their family dog, huddled in a corner of their creaking old Victorian home as we prepared our ridiculous interview. The daughter was so pale, she seemed to sink into the walls behind her, her face gaunt and her eyes tormented. We pounced on her as we questioned, suppressing our excited smirks with our palms. "He never leaves the house," she whispered, staring through us as if we weren't really there. If her eyes once sparkled, they certainly didn't now, lost and soulless as she stared into the abyss. It was Andy who managed to coax the words from her lips, his voice gentle as he carefully prodded. "Who is he? We have enough equipment here to find him in any corner of this old New England home. We just need as much as you can tell us." A mischievous smile spread across her lips as she finally looked at Andy, her voice soft and measured. "You don't have to find him. You'll know where he is, I promise. He walks on the ceiling and crawls down the walls. He will find you." The young girl's mother suddenly spoke, her eyes filled with tears. "She didn't used to talk like this," she whispered, her gaze wandering around the room decorated with faded family photos. "She's so tired, so tired. She doesn't sleep anymore, it won't let her." John then stood up, grinning as he clutched his camera. "Mrs. Blackwood, don't worry for a second. You're in good hands. We'll figure out what your visitor wants and drive him out. You have my word." His word meant nothing, but they didn't need to know that. The fear in their aura was palpable, as if they had their own pulsating gravity sucking the life out of the room. Their terror did something strange to me. It made me nervous. In all the nightly giggling and disguising in people's houses across Massachusetts, I had never been afraid. This job meant knowing that ghosts were as real as fairies in children's stories. It meant laughing at the notion. But during this interview, I didn't laugh. The girl's eyes were black holes and they looked like they'd long since sucked out her soul. So, with the image of those eyes burned into my retinas, we did what we did best. It was 11 p.m., and the family had booked a hotel across town. It was showtime. "Show yourself, demon!" John leaped through the front door as night enveloped the creaking house in darkness, dragging our mass of equipment inside. We obviously didn't need all that, but it made people believe that we really were expelling ghosts from their homes, complete with the flair of a tattered crucifix, a nod to the local New England ghost lore. Andy rolled his eyes and looked at the EMF meter in his hand. Dude, come on. Did you see how scared that girl was? I feel a bit bad. Shit, she was creepy, John said between chews of his gum, leaving muddy boot prints on the worn carpet as he climbed onto the couch to stick his camera on the wall. Walking on the ceiling, that guy must have the worst headaches. I stayed calm, biting my lip as I set up our audio equipment and stared at a tired-looking plastic dummy we had set up as a prop. The older it looked, the more authentic it seemed. John had assured me that much. Sure, I guess it really looked like it belonged in a 1998 horror game, but it was pretty pathetic. Not that we had ever caught anything on it. There was the big scare in the old Whitaker house down the street when the fridge seemed to sing a rocking tune, but it was just totally broken. Right, John jumped down, nearly stumbling over the coffee table. The plan is, Megan Blackwood leaves the house party she didn't want to go to at 2 a.m. I suggest we pack up by 1, swing by the party at the community center, and I'll be her shoulder to cry on because her arrogant boyfriend was an idiot all night again. Andy frowned, while John chuckled, but I remained silent and looked around the room. I couldn't deny that this old Victorian mansion felt different somehow. Even with all the lights dancing through the house, there was a hollow, lukewarm coldness that seemed to seep through the walls. There was no warmth here, no safety. Loving family photos faded by time were spread around the room, but somehow it felt barren. Wrong. I'm up for finishing this as quickly as possible, Andy murmured, his eyes nervously darting around. Do you feel it too? The place feels cursed? I finished for him, rolling my eyes at John's laughter. Okay, if you two are chicken, I'll start, he said ominously, staring into our main camera across the room, its red light blinking on the couch where we sat. It's time, guys. As always, we try to contact the ghost first and see if we can pick up anything on the microphone or the EMF meter. He cleared his throat and glanced at me. Okay. We're in your territory, ghost, he tried to project, but I heard a slight crack in his voice. We're here to find out what you want, why you're haunting this family. We're here to set you free. I counted down from 6, squinted my eyes and screamed, throwing myself backward. No way, I yelled, pointing outside the camera. There's no way. And we did the usual scuffle. Everyone claiming to have seen a picture frame fly, switching to shaky hand cam footage as John grabbed the camera from the floor where we had left it earlier. It was rehearsed, but something felt different. It's hard to describe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a pair of eyes were on me, a dreadful gaze burning into my back. The feeling intensified as we pulled out the familiar Ouija board only moments later, laid it on the table and shoved it into view. I nervously scratched my arms, trying not to stare at the shadows that seemed to engulf the room. All right, John murmured, placing his finger on the planchette. I'll ask for his name. Give him something creepy like Morris. I'll move it. You just stay still. Feel free to take the lead on this one, I offered, goosebumps rising on my skin. Has it gotten colder here? Andy certainly thought so, pulling his hoodie tighter around him, tapping something as he placed his finger alongside ours on the planchette. The fear was beyond earthly, beginning to creep over my skin, begging me to stop. Ghost, John demanded, dramatically looking into every corner of the room. Make yourself known. Show yourself. Communicate with us. I want to ask what name gives you your power. What's your name, Ghost? He waited a credibly long moment before the planchette slowly moved to M, but I knew my heart wasn't matching my indifferent reaction. John would later yell at me, claiming I'd ruined the whole Ouija recording, but I swore I could see something out of the corner of my eye, just outside my sight, staring at me. I didn't turn my head, didn't dare. Instead, I gritted my teeth and let my jaw drop dramatically. M-A-U-R-E. And so the planchette stopped, painfully almost. John made a face, turning to us. "Really now? Dude, I was almost done." "You stopped?" I contradicted, wondering if it was a blanket in the bookshelf or a wrinkled man staring lifelessly at me as I began to suspect. "Just do it again," Andy grumbled, which was unusual. We didn't argue, we didn't fight. The old house felt like it was sucking the life out of us, the joy. I felt physically tired, as if just being here was soul-draining. But, as I told myself, ghosts weren't real. We weren't real, we were opportunistic bastards, and we would be gone by 1 a.m. The planchette moved effortlessly back to M, and we forced our shock away, this time with less enthusiasm. Even John seemed to struggle now, his eyebrows drawn tight. M-A-U-R-I-C. And it stopped again, but this time it jerked to the left, making Andy let out a gasp. "John, damn, what's your problem?" John yelled, looking between us as if we were crazy. "Ever since we got in here, you've been acting like a couple of little girls. I swear to God, if Megan—" But his words died on his lips because, as we glared at each other, the planchette pulled our waiting fingers in the opposite direction and landed on a letter. B. John, for Christ's sake. E. The planchette scratched horrifically over the board, and I couldn't look away, sitting amid the chaos of my arguing friends, blaming each other without paying enough attention to the board. I swallowed hard and tried to spot any twitch in their fingers, any hint of who was messing with us. But it wasn't any of them. Their fingers were light, barely touching the object that awkwardly jerked over the board. Andy met my gaze, worry etched on his face. "Listen, I just want to get this over with and get out. If that's you, yell." "That's not it," I replied, my voice lost in the sound of John's growling as I yanked the planchette up, hurling it across the room until it hit the wall with a disgusting thud. I could only stare, shocked, at my angry, gasping friend, but Andy sprang up, throwing his arms out in confusion. "You can't be serious. John, damn it, what's wrong with you?" And they argued, shouting, flailing arms at each other, ignoring the room. But I couldn't ignore the room. I hadn't been able to since we walked in. The atmosphere tightening around my neck from the very first second we dared to be here. And they didn't notice, but I did. The ceiling in the corner of the room sagged, hanging limply from the shape beneath. Large, impossibly large, shrouded in shadow with fabric hanging horribly from it. A vision straight out of an old New England ghost story. "Shut up," I whispered to the guys next to me, but they didn't stop. They didn't stop as the ceiling drew closer to us, the sound of nails scraping across the worn wooden floor louder than even my friends. I could see the silhouette beneath, the darkness that followed, the cold, but they didn't notice until a screeching sound erupted, drawing our eyes toward the screaming monstrosity. "Shit!" Andy yelled, shaking his head at the EMF device, which blinked a bloody red, demanding attention. I was only briefly distracted by the chaos, turning in time to feel a terrible gust of wind as the ceiling collapsed into a crumpled heap just an inch from my nose, landing on my feet. The air was sucked from my lungs as I staggered backward, collapsing onto the couch and gasping instead of forming words. Andy looked at me worriedly, but John was done. "No," he growled, his face contorted by the howling EMF device. "Listen, I'm not doing this again. Come on, let's do something with this goddamn thing. Grab it, swing it around, just get the hell up." My eyes continued scanning the room, and I only broke out of my trance when a buzzing fly landed on my hand, narrowly escaping death with a jerk of my trembling finger. It woke me up. My voice sounded tenser than I would have liked. "Do you guys hear that? It recognizes something, John. I swear I saw. Broken microwave, crappy wiring, I don't know." He raised his voice threateningly. "Seriously, stop. Let's leave the room and run. We'll pretend we were spooked by the EMF, take a little walk down the block, and then go. I'm fed up with you two." I should have argued, obviously, I should have argued, but I can't describe how I felt at that moment. It was as if my fear was so quick to give way to denial that I declared myself crazy, desperate for the idea that, no, I was seeing things, feeling things. As if I needed to prove to myself that I was crazy and the horrors my mind conjured simply couldn't exist. So I stayed. I stayed as the three of us stumbled out of the creaking living room, pulling our clothes tighter around us and ignoring the ice that seeped into our skin. I ignored Andy pressing his shoulder against mine, a feeling he had never shown before. I ignored my pounding heart as we clutched our cameras tightly and stormed back into the dim, musty living room, ready to contort our faces in terror. But we didn't have to pretend. In the corner was our screaming EMF device, blinking red for the last 5 minutes. But the problem was the endless claws entwining it, attached to a figure so large that its head brushed the sagging plaster ceiling, and black eyes stared at us. It swayed in the shadows, but I could see its arms, gaunt and as long as its legs, the neck cracking horribly as it turned toward us in a flash. A sickening dripping was loud enough for us to hear, and to this day I imagine it as thick, blood-red ichor falling from its fingers onto its dead, twisted toes. Hell. Staring down from above. My memory is blurred, and part of me thinks my brain tried to erase the trauma to give me a half chance of moving on with my life. I remember John being lifted into the air with such a guttural scream that I haven't heard anything like it since. I recall the sound of his bones cracking as we ran straight into the living room. We hurled furniture out the window into the overgrown backyard, ignoring the thud of John's lifeless body hurtling toward us and crashing into the wall with a sickening smash. I know we got out. I felt his eyes burning behind me as our skin clung to the glass of the old sash windows, as we ran into the lashing New England rain and screamed for any help we could find. When the paramedics arrived, most of John's leg was already gone, the remains nowhere to be found. He woke 6 days later in a Massachusetts hospital, screaming bloody murders. Screams that continued until he was sedated, only a sobbing wail when they woke him for the 3rd time. The ground floor of the house was destroyed, along with everything inside. Our equipment was crushed, all evidence of our horrors wiped out, except for the ghostly look in Andy's eyes and the nightmares that still wake me at 3 a.m. Wild animals tore the leg off an unconscious John, said the local police from a small nearby town. We were just idiots holding a seance in an old Victorian house, leaving the back door open to all sorts of wild creatures while we got drunk. At first, they thought we had wrecked the house, but the Blackwood family assured the police it wasn't the case. That had happened before. They said we just got caught in the crossfire. They gave their statement that night, protested our innocence, and then packed their bags. They never left. Their little girl disappeared that night, just before they could flee. Her suitcase lay untouched in her room, and that house became a sad legend on these streets of Salem, spoken of in hushed tones. I left town, but something in me never left. We don't talk about it, the three of us. We walked away, and when we meet, that night exists as the elephant in the room. John's scarred stump reminding us that we didn't imagine the whole thing as a collective fever dream. So I left, lived my life, started going to church, took up baseball with the local Little League. And when I hear the sound of thunderous footsteps on the ceiling of my hallway in the quiet night, I pull the covers over my head and pray to every god that exists or doesn't that I'll live another day. It takes so long to pick up all 104 crosses from the floor the next morning, but for the rest of my life I will never stop. I am a registered nurse currently working night shifts at a hospital in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's really exhausting, but I'm hoping to switch to day shifts soon because a few of my coworkers are planning to retire. Anyway, one night, just after 3 a.m., the baby monitor for my 3-year-old son Connor alerted me with noises and movements. No big deal. He probably just coughed or sneezed. He usually sleeps through the night. I opened the app on my phone and saw him and my wife Sarah sitting on the bed. Still no big deal. Maybe he got scared or started crying. I was about to close the app when I realized they were acting strangely, almost creepily. And when I say almost creepy, I mean extremely creepy. They were sitting together on Connor's bed, staring into the camera with blank, emotionless expressions. The night vision made it all black and white, which gave them those weird, glowing eyes. They weren't moving at all, except for the rise and fall of their breathing. They just sat there, staring. I closed the app and decided to call Sarah to make sure everything was okay. I rarely get the chance to call home during my break, so part of me was actually happy to hear her voice at work, even though I was a bit uneasy about what I'd just seen. The phone rang a couple of times before she answered with a very sleepy-sounding, "Hello?" It seemed like I woke her up from deep sleep, which was confusing, because on the camera she looked wide awake. "Hey, are you guys okay?" I asked. "Huh?" "Yeah, Connor came into our bedroom about 15 minutes ago. He seemed scared, so I told him he could sleep with Mommy," she said. I was confused because I'd literally just seen them in his room on the camera. It had only been a minute since I closed the app and made the call. "Wait, you're in bed?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm trying to get back to sleep. You keep calling and waking me up," she grumbled, annoyed. "Hang on a second." I put her on speaker and reopened the app, hoping I'd see nothing unusual. As the app started loading, my stomach churned with the same nervous feeling I used to get in school when I realized at breakfast I'd forgotten a big assignment. My heart pounded in my ears. Sure enough, my wife and my son were still there on Connor's bed, both wearing the same eerie expressions, gazing blankly at the camera. "Hello?" Sarah's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "You guys are in our bed, right?" I asked. "Yes, we're trying to sleep," she replied. "I'm looking at the baby monitor right now and I see you two in Connor's room, on his bed." "What? Number, we're in our bedroom." I know it sounds insane, but I'm staring at the camera feed. I see you and Connor in his bed. "Wait," she said. I heard her fumbling to open the baby monitor app on her phone. There was a sudden, shocked gasp, like she had sucked every bit of air in the room into her lungs. Sarah almost never does that, only when she's really, truly scared, like in a jump scare at the movies, or that one time we looked away for a second, and she found herself way too close to a busy road. I heard the sheets rustle, and then the line went dead. By now, I was completely freaked out and called back immediately. It went to voicemail, so I tried again, over and over. No answer. Finally, about 4 minutes later, she called me back. Those 4 minutes felt like 40 years. "What's going on?" I demanded. She was crying so hard I couldn't make out any words at first. "Stop, calm down," I urged. She managed to calm herself enough to say she was in the car, on her way to her parents' house. She had looked at the camera feed, seen what I saw, grabbed our son, run down the stairs and bolted out the door. She didn't even bother closing the garage. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll swing by when I get off work and close it. Our neighborhood's pretty safe." "You're not going in there," she practically yelled. "Definitely not," I assured her. "What did we see on the camera?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Was it some kind of recorded footage?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm going to keep watching and see if anything changes. Remember our code words with Connor. We're a bit nerdy like that. We watch too many sci-fi and horror movies about clones or imposters. so we've had code words and phrases we practice to verify that we're really ourselves. We actually have a little 3-sentence story where each of us says a part in sequence. I heard her saying those lines to Connor on the phone. He giggled while repeating his part. He always thinks it's a silly game, having no clue what it's really for. She said her parts correctly. I was convinced that this really was my wife, and that was really my son. She got safely to her parents' place, and although it was tough to hang up, I told her we'd deal with it in the morning. Hopefully, it was just a tech glitch. She said she didn't believe that. As she ran out of the house, she had to pass Connor's room, and the door was open. She saw the tiny indicator light blinking on the back of the camera, showing it was connected to the internet. There was just enough light that she caught a glimpse of a shape, a silhouette like an adult sitting on Connor's bed. The thought gave me chills. It was comforting to know she and Connor were safe, and that got me through the rest of my shift, which was 4 long hours. But every chance I got, I checked the camera. Sure enough, these lookalikes were still perched on his bed, staring with empty eyes into the camera. I studied them, trying to see if there was any pattern in their breathing or blinking. Anything to suggest it might be a weird, looped video feed. Their breathing looked normal, but the blinking was my main focus. I told myself, if this is some glitchy recording, their blinks would be on a fixed pattern. But there was none. It was random and unpredictable, like a real person's. By the time my shift ended and I could see daylight creeping in through the window on the feed, I knew for sure it wasn't some looping snippet of old footage. I tried to figure out what to do before I left work. Calling the police crossed my mind, but I hesitated. First, what was I going to say? That someone was in my house looking exactly like my wife and son, but not them? And worse, what if these things were truly dangerous creatures and the police confronted them only to get hurt or killed? I decided to tell a coworker of mine who's really into the paranormal. I showed him the video and told him the whole story. His first reaction, "That's creepy as hell," didn't exactly calm me down, but he suggested we should go together and see if not my wife would pretend to be Sarah if we confronted her. I said, absolutely not. He persisted, saying at least we could go close the garage. I agreed because leaving it open bothered me. When we got to my house, we first walked around the outside, like we were securing the perimeter or something. I'm not sure what we thought we'd accomplish, but it felt like the right thing to do. The curtains were drawn, so we couldn't see inside. I went to the garage to close it, and suddenly I had this overwhelming urge to go inside and investigate, like I just had to know what was happening. So we went in. We walked through the kitchen to the foyer where the staircase is located. The house was so silent, you could hear a pin drop. No, more like a feather drop. We hesitated at the bottom of the stairs for a few seconds. I checked my phone again. Not my wife and not my son were still sitting on the bed in the camera feed. I'd never felt that level of fear in my life. My coworker put his foot on the bottom step and I suddenly said, "Stop." "Screw this. We're leaving," I said. "Come on." I turned to head back to the kitchen. That's when we heard a loud creak from upstairs, Connor's room. There's a very squeaky floorboard right in the middle that's almost impossible to avoid. My wife and I have joked about never fixing it, because when Connor gets older, it'll be hard for him to sneak out. "Come on, come on, come on," I yelled, motioning for my friend to hurry. We were out of the house in about 2 seconds. On the sidewalk, I checked my phone. Now, not my son was alone on the bed. That same blank stare at the camera. Not my wife was gone. "Holy crap," my friend muttered. "That was so stupid of us. Please, don't tell my wife we went inside," I pleaded. She'd be furious if she knew. I used the remote in my car to close the garage. before leaving, I checked the camera one last time. Not. My wife was back on the bed, alongside not my son, both staring blankly into the camera and blinking every few seconds. That was about 4 days ago. They were still on that bed, still staring. Neither of them moved an inch. Obviously, we weren't planning on going back in. What the hell were we supposed to do? On day 6, I finally called the police. I told the dispatcher there were intruders in my house, but left out the part about them looking like my family. I said we'd left the house and would meet the police there. 2 patrol cars arrived shortly afterward. My wife begged me not to be anywhere near the house, but I said I had to be there, and I had a foolproof plan. I borrowed her mom's phone so I could FaceTime my wife while showing the responding officers the live feed on my own phone. That way, they'd see Sarah and Connor in real time and see on my screen that there were duplicates inside the house. Even if they didn't believe it was anything paranormal, they'd at least be on guard. My coworker friend, who'd already witnessed everything, tagged along. We got there before the officers did. As some of you might guess, I was armed. I have a concealed carry permit and was carrying my Walther P.99. I also had my father-in-law's AR-15 locked in the trunk, which I wasn't planning to mention to the police. I figured they'd show up armed and ready anyway. When the officers arrived, I told them I was armed. Then, I gave them a rundown of the whole story. They looked at each other like I was crazy, but at least it piqued their interest. I FaceTimed my wife, so they could see she was obviously not in the house despite the camera feed. They still seemed skeptical, but it got them thinking. "All right, so we can confirm this isn't some kind of recording," one officer repeated. Exactly. The day-night cycle has changed every day on the feed, and their blinking is totally random, I explained. "I know this might be a silly question," said the other officer, "but your wife doesn't have a twin sister, right?" "No," I said. My friend chimed in with an idea. "Let's test something. Turn the volume up. I'll toss a pebble at the window from outside." He went around back while I turned my phone volume to max. "Okay, I'm throwing," he called. We heard a faint tick from outside, and about a second later, that same tick came clearly through the app's slight delay. Not my wife moved her head ever so slightly toward the sound at the window, the first real movement I'd seen since day 1. Then she turned her head back to the camera. "Okay, that's live," the first officer confirmed. "Sir, I need you and your friend to wait out here. We'll head inside and see what's going on." "Shouldn't you call for more backup?" I asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. "Not yet. We'll assess first. It doesn't look like they're armed, but we'll proceed with caution." I opened the garage for them, and they went in through the kitchen door. Over their radios, we heard them say they were entering. Then they vanished into my house. A few seconds later, the camera feed went dead. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. "Damn it!" I yelled at my friend. I sprang to the trunk, grabbed the AR-15 and dashed into the garage, my friend on my heels. We made it inside just in time to hear this deep, guttural howl from upstairs, almost demonic, followed by the officers shouting. Then multiple gunshots rang out. "Officers need assista. Shots fire." One of them started yelling, then abruptly cut off. "Oh my God," my friend shrieked, voice shaking with terror. "Damn it, I knew it," I muttered and ran upstairs, flipping the safety off on the rifle. Connor's room is the first door you see at the top of the stairs, so the wall is visible immediately. I ran up, pressed my back to the wall. My AR-15 holds 15 rounds, but it felt like I fired 100. I aimed at the area of the bed, near the door, and near the floor in case these things were ducking. I heard screams of pain from inside the room, and then everything fell silent. We waited maybe half a minute before stepping inside, but the camera was still dead. We heard faint whimpering. One of the officers lay dead in the hallway, missing his head. His head was several feet away by the guest room door. I'll never erase that image from my mind. The other officer lay in Connor's doorway. Huge holes punched through his chest like something impaled him. I realized my greatest fear had come true. I called the police, and these things killed them. Not my wife was on her back in the middle of the room, clutching wounds in her torso, breathing heavily. It was a horrible sight. I can't properly convey how gruesome it was, and yet, in that moment, a part of me was torn. I knew she wasn't my real wife, but it felt like looking at Sarah. I hesitated, dropping to my knees. Not my wife begged for her life. "I don't want to die, baby," she whimpered. "I still want to have more children. I can't die now." I glanced over to not my son. He had to be dead. He'd taken at least 2 shots to the head, plus more in the torso, arms, and legs. Seeing a child's body, even knowing it's not your child, is pure hell. I felt sick. It felt like I had killed my own family. I turned back to not my wife, who sounded exactly like Sarah, even mimicking her subtle fear of death. "Dude, it's not her," my friend said. I'd forgotten he was behind me. "It's not her. Finish it." I know this is the point in movies where you yell at the main character, "Just shoot the imposter. It isn't your loved one." But the movies get that hesitation right. I'll never again judge a character for freezing up. "Please don't shoot me," she pleaded. My hands shook as I aimed. Why couldn't I do it? I knew it wasn't my wife. "Look," my friend said, stepping closer. "Her blood's yellow. That's not your family." I glanced down. It was yellow. Somehow, I'd missed that detail in the trauma of seeing a dead child's body. That was enough. I steadied my gun, and not my wife stopped begging. She let out a deep, monstrous screech, and something dark, gray or black, started leaking out of her mouth. Almost like a tentacle, I fired. At that close range, her head more or less exploded. Whatever they were, they seemed killable by normal means. I was still on my knees. My friend stood in the hallway. Sirens wailed outside. Reinforcements, paramedics, everybody. And it struck me that an officer had likely gotten out a partial "shots fired" call, which triggered the response. It had only been 5 minutes, but it felt like hours since they first went in. My friend went downstairs to meet the arriving cops and warn them. I stood up and stumbled into the hallway, feeling dizzy and ready to vomit. Our bedroom was right next to Connor's, maybe a yard away. Its door had been closed, but as I stepped out of Connor's room, my bedroom door creaked open. Not me stepped into the hall, wearing exactly what I was wearing. I froze. It came toward me, and its right arm turned black and elongated, forming a sort of whipping tentacle, like an octopus. It extended that arm, then hardened it into a spike, which stabbed me clean through the belly. It retracted and stabbed me again above my left knee. I collapsed, screaming. Not me's tentacle-like arm quivered again. "Why did you kill my family?" it asked, voice shifting in pitch and timbre. For part of the question, it used my exact voice, then deeper, then back to normal. It took a step closer. My AR-15 had fallen somewhere behind me, but I still had my Walther P-99 in its holster at my side. I grabbed it and fired a shot into Not Me's right knee. It let out a roar, dropping to that knee. I fired 2 more rounds, hitting its torso on the left side. It heaved, gasping, and I mustered the last bit of strength I had to aim carefully and deliver a round to its face. Yellow blood spattered from the wound. I lay there, hemorrhaging, thinking this was the end. A burst of adrenaline allowed me to pull off my belt and cinch it around my leg, trying to slow the bleeding. Then I took off my shirt, balled it up, and pressed it to the wound in my stomach, applying as much pressure as I could. My nursing background probably saved my life in that moment. I drifted in and out of consciousness. I vaguely remember hearing frantic footsteps pounding up the stairs, probably the rest of the police force. I felt someone pressing down on my injuries before I blacked out. Later, I came to in the emergency room. My wounds had been cleaned and stitched. The tentacle wasn't much wider than a big knife, so there wasn't a giant gash, but it was still severe. I was getting blood transfusions, which my wife had authorized. She was livid that I'd gone inside the house, but we'd work through that later. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. An infection nearly killed me. I was on heavy antibiotics for days. The entire time, different officers took turns asking me questions. Eventually, they lifted the armed guard, but for a while, I was technically in custody. I told them everything, logic be damned. Thankfully, my friend backed up my story in all its bizarre detail. After a couple of weeks, some men in suits came to see me. Federal agents for sure. They said they were from a certain division, but I'm not sure I believed them. The police chief and the medical examiner were looped in, and it was all handled very hush-hush. The agents made it clear that this situation should remain a secret. I'm sorry if the ending is anticlimactic, but we truly don't know what these things were. The only solid fact is that they were sentient creatures that looked exactly like us but had yellow blood. The medical examiner wouldn't tell me anything at first, but I guess he felt some sympathy for what I'd been through. Because one day, I got a bouquet of flowers with a note tucked inside. We don't know what they are. They have the same organs we do, just arranged differently in the body, except for the brain. Where ours is red and pink, theirs is green and yellow. They are humanoid, but definitely not human. The government suspects they might be extraterrestrials. Burn this message ASAP. We had our house professionally cleaned, almost certainly by a government-contracted team. They contacted us on behalf of the police, but there was no sign of them anywhere online. No website, no Google reviews, nothing. Sarah and I aren't going back to that house. If we could, we'd set it on fire and be done with it, but that would be too suspicious. The property's going to be hard to sell, obviously. Everyone in the neighborhood knows something horrific happened, but they don't know what. Still, we'll move on. I told people at work that there was a break-in. They believed it. I'll be back to work in a few weeks and we'll start looking for a new home. Sorry again if this conclusion feels uncertain, but we genuinely have no idea what those things were. Extraterrestrials are a convenient guess. I figure if they were demons or ghosts, bullets wouldn't have worked. They bled and died like living creatures, just not human ones. But if they really were aliens, well, keep your eyes open. There could be more of them out there. Right from the start, I want to make one thing clear. I never believed in ghosts. At least, not until my experience last week. Now, I'm not so sure. What changed my mind? My night in a creepy roadside motel. I suppose, by definition, any roadside motel in the middle of nowhere could be described as eerie. The nearby highways, the dimly lit parking lots, the sketchy figures leaning in doorways, smoking cigarettes. And the motel where my girlfriend and I stayed last week, where I had this paranormal experience, was no different. It was a place frozen in the 1950s called Sage Hill Lodge. We found it right off Highway 7 somewhere in rural Colorado. We were driving up from Phoenix to attend a friend's wedding in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we chose to take the scenic route because my girlfriend hates flying. Why not? I thought at the time. What could be more pleasant than a summer road trip through the open plains and mountains? It turned out a lot could be less than pleasant. The so-called scenic route brought nothing but pouring rain, and little else. A storm blew in from the west the moment we left Grand Junction. The music on the radio was drowned out by the relentless squeak of our windshield wipers. We'd planned to spend the night at my buddy's place in Colorado Springs, but that morning he called to say his mom had fallen ill and he was on his way to care for her in Denver. No big deal, I thought. We'd just crash somewhere else along the way. That's where the roadside motel came in. We pulled into the parking lot just before sundown. Over the pounding of the rain, I asked, "Is this place abandoned?" It was a valid question, since half the doors and windows in the U-shaped courtyard were boarded up. My girlfriend silently pointed to a small office where a flickering neon sign read Sage Hill Lodge. Through a grimy window, I could see an old woman sitting behind a desk, watching us. I got out into the rain. Lightning shot across the dark sky while I weaved around puddles in the broken asphalt. Between claps of thunder, I could hear the rumble of passing trucks on the nearby highway. When I stepped into the office, a place that smelled like cigarettes and mothballs, the old woman just stared at me, her eyes hollow and lifeless. "Are you open?" I asked, water dripping from my jacket onto the stained carpet. She said nothing, just kept watching me with those vacant eyes. Then, as though she'd considered my question at length, she slowly started to nod. "Okay, so how much for a room?" She stood up from the stool behind the counter and handed me a keyring marked with the number 66. Right. This was the moment in every horror movie where the main character should just turn around, get back in the car, and drive away. It's the part when you, the safe moviegoer, shout, "Don't go down there, you idiot." But what do they always do? They go down anyway. I guess it wouldn't be much of a story if the protagonist just slammed the door and left the killer in the darkness, right? Anyway, I digress. As the old woman pushed the keys toward me, I waved a $20 bill in the air like a white flag. "20 for the night?" She nodded once again and pointed at the keys. I glanced out the window toward the car. Lightning briefly illuminated my girlfriend sitting inside, peering at me nervously through the fogged windshield. "Are we really staying here?" I turned back to the old woman, picked up the keys and muttered, "Thanks," then stepped back into the downpour. In the car, I dangled the keys in front of my girlfriend. "Friendly lady," I said cheerfully. "Said it'll be quiet tonight." "Yeah, just a bit," she replied, eyeing the dark courtyard. "This place is creeping me out. Why don't we just drive all the way to Cheyenne tonight?" "Nah, it'll be fine." I fired up the engine and pulled around to room 66. "One night won't kill us." Famous last words. Surprisingly, room 66 was pretty modern. Whitewashed walls, a flat-screen TV, a mini fridge, a clean private bathroom, some potted plants, a mirror. It almost calmed our nerves about being the only guests in a rundown motel during a raging storm. Of course, there was a door, an apparently locked door, on the far side of the room that we assumed led to some storage closet. I jiggled the knob once, then forgot about it. We both showered and climbed into bed. My girlfriend, who can nap on a cliff edge in the middle of a hurricane, fell asleep almost instantly. It took me much longer. I tossed and turned, but eventually drifted off. I woke up around 2 a.m., and that's when things got weird. It started with a noise on the roof. Not the rain against the flat surface. No, it sounded like footsteps, pacing back and forth. Okay, I thought, it's probably a bird. Just a bird on the roof. But the more I tried to reassure myself, the louder and more frantic those footsteps became, until, suddenly, they stopped completely. I lay there under the sheets, listening. The rain had died down, and the storm seemed to be moving on, but the wind still howled around the courtyard outside. Calm down, I told myself, getting up to go to the bathroom. using the faint glow from the parking lot lights to guide me. Right then, midway through my business, the bathroom door, which I had purposely left wide open, began to close on its own. My first reaction, seeing it in my peripheral vision, was to blame an uneven floor. But then my brain kicked into overdrive. Had the door ever done that before? No, it stayed put all evening. The floor was definitely level. So there I was, finishing up as this door creaked shut on its own. The bathroom was nearly pitch black, no windows, no natural light, and my heart pounded like crazy because I had this irrational fear that someone was standing in the tub, a little girl maybe, watching me. The moment the door clicked shut, I knew I was in trouble, that something lurking in the shadows was about to rip my throat out. At the last second, I grabbed the door, jammed my fingers in the gap, and flicked on the light. No one was in the tub. It was all in my head. I stood there, panting, a thin layer of sweat covering my body. I set the door all the way open again and waited for it to move, just to disprove my perfectly level floor theory. It didn't budge an inch. I tried placing it at different angles. Nope. It stayed right where I left it. Okay, that's creepy. I switched the light off and went back to bed, lying still as my heart thumped in my ears. Right then, I saw a silhouette pass the window. It was faint, but definitely someone out there. I sat up, watching the curtains and the weak glow of the parking lot. Could it be that old woman from the office, making her rounds? The old woman who never said anything and took my $20? Hey, I whispered, shaking my girlfriend awake. No time to act brave now. Hey, Amy, I repeated, shaking her harder. Wake up, for God's sake. But she lay there, unmoving, almost like she was unconscious. A wave of panic overcame me, and right then, the parking lot lights went out, plunging the room into total darkness. Wake up, Amy, I wanted to scream, but no sound came out, and that's when I heard it. A key sliding into the other door across the room. The one we'd assumed was just a storage closet. That key turned slowly until the lock clicked. Even though I couldn't see in the dark, I felt the cold air rush in and knew the door was swinging open. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, I thought, sitting there beside my unresponsive girlfriend, shaking with fear. What do you want? I croaked. My only answer was the flick of a light switch, revealing what lay beyond that door. It was a corridor, but that couldn't be possible, right? This motel was just a small U-shaped building with separate units. How could there be enough space for a secret hallway? Yet there it was, plain as day. I stood up in my pajamas and began walking toward it. Why? I have no idea. Something was pulling me in, like my body was no longer under my own control. No, I rasped, trying to force my legs to stop moving. I could only move my neck, so I glanced back at my girlfriend in bed, hoping she might wake up and save me from whatever horrors awaited. But as I turned my head, I saw that she was indeed awake, staring at me with those same hollow, lifeless eyes as the old woman at the desk. Amy? I stammered. She lifted a finger to her lips, shushing me. Then she grinned, and blood trickled from her mouth, dripping down her chin. What the? I never finished that sentence because the force dragging me forward pulled me into that hidden corridor. On both sides, it stretched into darkness, lined with doors, each door labeled with the number 666. Then, from the far end, a red glow flickered, growing brighter. Strangely, I felt a pulse in it, like a giant heartbeat throbbing somewhere down there. I twisted my neck again, looking back into our room, where I saw my girlfriend now standing near the TV, her body slumped, her face hidden behind her hair, like she was possessed. Amy! I tried to scream, but once again, no words came. The corridor glowed so intensely I could feel heat on my skin. The worst part came next. Behind each door lining that corridor, I heard voices. People I knew. One voice belonged to a close friend who died long ago. He was calling my name, pounding on his door, begging me to let him out, saying it was my fault he'd died. I have no idea how long I was stuck in that hallway. A minute? A day? For all I know, maybe I'm still in there, trapped behind one of those doors, waiting, like my friend, for the next poor soul to stumble in. Yet somehow, and I don't know how, I found myself back in the car, driving along Highway 7, shaking uncontrollably. My girlfriend lay unconscious in the passenger seat. I pulled off at the first town we came to, stumbled out at someone's doorstep, and babbled incoherently about demons and ghosts and secret corridors and motels. It's been a week now, and my girlfriend still hasn't woken up. That night, she was taken by ambulance to the University Hospital in Denver, where doctors say she's in a coma. I gave the police my statement about what happened at the motel. They don't believe me. Of course they don't, would you? One cop mentioned that Sage Hill Lodge was shuttered in the 1960s, after a father murdered his entire family there one night. But that's my story. Amy's family is here at the hospital, refusing to speak to me. They think I tried to kill her. I called my own parents, and they flew in a few days ago. My dad is hiring a lawyer because he's worried I'll be charged with something if Amy doesn't wake up. I'm sharing this because I have nowhere else to turn. Maybe I'm crazy, but I know I experienced something dark and unsettling in that motel last week. That's all I can say. My grandfather was a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. He never wanted to be called an investigator. He used to say, "There's nothing to investigate, only things to disprove." He was never a believer, and in his line of work, he made even Houdini, who was also famously skeptical for those who didn't know, look like a casual hobbyist. Any sound in the night, any weird shadow in a photo, he could explain away. Over the course of his career, he was called to hundreds, maybe even thousands of sites all across the United States. Private homes, abandoned buildings, isolated cabins. Anywhere, people claimed something unearthly was going on. Some folks were genuinely terrified by doors slamming or paintings falling off walls. Others just wanted to test his abilities. Every time, he showed the homeowners that the slope of their floors caused doors to close if windows were open, or that pictures hung on thin drywall so the nails eventually worked themselves loose. Even those who tried to fool him with hidden passageways or fake floors found no success. He would root out their secrets, and as the years went on, became something of a Photoshop expert for digital hoaxes too. Whenever I was scared of a monster under the bed or in my closet, I called Grandpa. He'd patiently explain why I didn't need to worry, and just hearing his calm voice would put me at ease. He was my greatest comfort, and soon I started working with him a bit during high school. It kept me busy, and I even managed to turn it into a sort of internship, earning elective credits by following him on calls and learning how he debunked every claim of the paranormal. I never planned to take over the family business or anything like that, but I did enjoy the experience. He didn't bring me along on all his visits. Sometimes I had exams, and other times he felt I should focus on school. But there's one trip in particular that I can't decide if I regret missing or if I'm glad I wasn't there. That's the story I want to share with you. I learned about the address at 19 Oak Lane only after my grandfather had been there. Honestly, I might never have heard of it at all if he hadn't kept such meticulous written records of every case, and if that house hadn't turned out to be so well protected. Last night, I was clearing out his rented office space in an old colonial building in Boston burying myself in work to keep from succumbing to grief. About a week ago, Grandpa passed away in a strange and sudden manner. A month before he died, his doctor discovered a mass on his thyroid, cancer, I think, and it had already begun metastasizing in his brain and lungs. Normally, thyroid cancer is caught early and treatable, so the whole thing came as a shock. But even the best of us have our vulnerabilities, and this was his. He suffered only briefly, dying just a few weeks after the diagnosis. He chose not to treat it, possibly out of pride and the desire to maintain control over his final days. Now, however, I'm not entirely sure that's the whole story. Maybe he knew any treatment was pointless. In any case, there I was, tidying his office. That's when I found the envelope. Plain, unlabeled, resting at the bottom of the top drawer of his desk, as though it were waiting to be overlooked. I think the very absence of a label made me open it. He labeled everything else with dates and titles, and this was the only thing left blank. Inside were just a few sheets of paper, seemingly like all his other notes, but the fact that they were set apart told me they mattered. In his distinctive half-cursive scrawl, Grandpa detailed one of his more recent cases. Usually, his notes were short and to the point. Hearing voices, security camera mics hacked, or rats in the pipes causing strange squeaks, along with brief event summaries. But this time, it was different. 19 Oak Lane. This house should be condemned and left to rot. Nobody belongs in that place. It's the work of something I've spent my life denying. But I can't deny it anymore. Not after what I saw. There have been plenty of fakers, but there's not a chance in heaven or hell that this was staged. I witnessed things I can't explain. And this is the place that's going to kill me. I know it. From the moment I started reading, I was confused. This was completely unlike him. My grandfather never resorted to drama or exaggerated language, and I had never heard of 19 Oak Lane before. The entry was just over a month old, meaning it was recent, and yet I'd seen Grandpa plenty of times since then. He never mentioned it. A woman named Mrs. Snyder called me. She said there was a strange figure roaming the house at night. She tried to cope with it alone, but her husband travels for work, and with a new baby, she had good reason to be scared. I assumed it was an intruder and was eager to help. If some lowlife was terrorizing a young mother, I wanted to put a stop to it. I arrived on a Friday night, and she insisted I stay with her and the baby. Her husband was confirmed to be away on business in another state, which reliable witnesses and photos seemed to back up. I did my usual checks. No hidden doors, no broken windows, everything secured. That night, we settled into the master bedroom with the baby in her arms, while Mrs. Snyder and I stayed awake, waiting. She said it happened every night, so it didn't take long for me to notice something. It started as a faint sound of footsteps pacing the hallway outside the closed door, like someone walking back and forth. They weren't the heavy steps of a man in boots, but rather the soft shuffle of a light-footed individual. Strange, because she told me it was a man's presence in the house. After a while, the noise stopped, then started again, this time coming from the master bathroom. Mrs. Snyder flinched, and I have to admit, it rattled me too, because as far as I knew, the only way into that bathroom was through the door inside the bedroom. How could footsteps move from the hallway to the bathroom without passing by us? "It's just getting started," she whispered. And even in the dim light, I could see the terror in her eyes, the color draining from her face. I told her I'd catch whoever it was. It was cruel, terrorizing a woman like this. "Don't go in there," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice that even the best actor couldn't fake. I've never looked directly at it. I just know something terrible will happen if you provoke it. I only called you because I needed someone to confirm I'm not crazy. I don't need you to get rid of it. I'm leaving. We can move. I just needed you to believe me. Please, let's just go." I can't say she didn't warn me. "It'll be all right, ma'am, I promise," I said. "I just want to take a look. Whoever's in there can't hurt me, and you shouldn't have to move out of your own home. Let me chase him off." That's when I headed for the bathroom, opened the door, and reached for the light switch. Nothing happened. I flicked it a few more times. Still nothing. I stepped back into the bedroom and tried the other switch, which worked fine. That was odd. I'd already checked the circuit breaker earlier, and the same breaker that controlled the bathroom also controlled the bedroom. Whoever was in there must have broken the bulb. Without thinking twice, I stepped inside, took a few steps forward, then felt a breeze as the door behind me slammed shut. I heard Mrs. Snyder scream, and the baby began to cry. Normally, I wouldn't be afraid in a situation like this, but a chill ran up my spine, and I noticed my hands were shaking. Taking a deep breath, I moved further in, but I was stopped by a violent force. I stumbled backward, trying to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Moonlight filtered in from a narrow window over the tiled tub, allowing me to make out the room's details. But inside the bathtub, there was something that hadn't been there before. It was a standalone tub, so it wasn't a shower curtain or anything like that. No chandelier or artwork hung in that corner, yet I saw the outline of a man, bigger than any man I'd ever seen before. He must have been around 6.5 feet tall, maybe taller, rail thin, and wearing what looked like a tall top hat. My blood ran cold because I knew this was no trick. The figure began moving toward me, and as it reached for my neck, I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt its hand pass through my skin. Impossible as it was, I swear it felt physical, the weight of its grip closing off my windpipe. I kicked and thrashed, but it made no difference. I survived only because it let go, withdrew its hand, then slowly receded toward the tub before vanishing altogether. I scrambled back to the door, back to Mrs. Snyder. I grabbed her hand and told her we had to leave. I didn't look back. I didn't care about any belongings, I just knew we had to go. She warned me, and I wanted no part of that power. We ran out, and I helped her and the baby into my van before we sped away. I don't know what we experienced that night, but I know it allowed me to live. It wants to be known, wants me to tell people what happened. I spent my life telling everyone that these things aren't real, so I guess it's only fair it showed me how real it truly is. And it killed me. Doctors can say it was cancer, but I was perfectly healthy before that night. When that creature grabbed my throat, I believe it infected my entire being, planted something toxic in my cells to prove how powerful it is. The tumor in my neck has these strange tendrils branching out, something the doctors have never seen. I told them I had no idea what it might be, but I know it's the handprint of that being, because the mass is exactly where I felt its hideous grip. It kept me alive just long enough to understand what it did, so the fear could grow. But I refuse to talk about it, because I don't want my loved ones thinking they can save me from it. I'll hide it from them, make sure nobody ever goes back to that house to witness that hell. If anyone reads this, understand with all my heart that what I saw that night was real, and believe me when I say, don't ever think, not even for a second, that we're alone in this world. Those were the last lines in the file. Sitting there in Grandpa's office, I read them over and over. He was the biggest skeptic I knew, and for him to write those words, and to hide them, says everything. He always taught me that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered and explained. But after reading his account, I'm not sure every truth can be understood, and maybe some truths are better left alone. Could you tell me a little more about the property? Absolutely. It was built in the late 1870s in a small town in Ohio, but most of its original structure and exterior have been replaced and modernized over the years. You know how it goes. Old world craftsmanship doesn't always match current styles and safety requirements. I know exactly what you mean, but from what you're saying, it's quite an old house. That must mean it carries a certain history. Are there any stories surrounding it? I've heard a few local legends. A neighbor once told me that during Prohibition, the place was used as a secret distillery. I also heard that Franklin D. Roosevelt supposedly had a photo taken in front of the house. Never seen any photographic proof, though. Oh, and someone once claimed that a religious cult settled in this vacant house for an entire summer. They said the members left strange markings and small scorch marks on the walls. What were they called again? The Friends of the Flame, or the Circle of Fire, something like that. That's how it was told to me, but I've got no idea if it's even true. The only story I know for certain is that a young couple with a little child lived here before we did, and prior to that, an elderly lady occupied the house. Well, if all that is true, it's definitely a property with quite a history. Old houses like this often come with their share of local legends. Sometimes that's a selling point. I'm looking at your file right now and see here that you've taken out our Golden Paranormal insurance policy, which covers hauntings, poltergeists, possessions, and death caused by supernatural occurrences. That's correct. I completely understand why you went for our top-tier policy. Given the house's age and potential backstory, it makes sense to want the best protection against ghostly activity, especially if there was indeed some sort of cult activity in the past. Actually, that's what I was going to ask about, though I'm hesitant to hear the answer. If those claims about the cult are accurate, that won't affect my coverage, right? I saw something in the contract about not covering hauntings if the spirit or entity was summoned on purpose. No, you're still fully eligible. That clause only applies if you are the one who summoned the entity. Oh good, that's a relief. Anyway, I need to discuss your claim. I see here that you're seeking $2,500 for property damage and another $9,500 for the emotional and physical stress this haunting has caused you and your family. Does that sound correct, Mr. Johnson? Yes, that's correct. Great. Now, as I'm sure you understand, I need to do my due diligence and ask a few questions about the alleged haunting. This will help me advance your claim, but you may still be subject to a visit from an investigator. Their job will be to check if your supernatural activities are genuine and whether the amount you're asking for is appropriate. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. I just hope you can process my claim quickly. My family's been through enough, and we don't want this dragging on. Well, sir, if you can describe the strange events you've experienced, we can get started. Let's begin with how the haunting started. The first incident happened just over a month ago. It was subtle at first, I nearly missed it. It was a chilly night and I was sitting by the fireplace poking around in the embers after the flames had died. My wife and the kids had already gone upstairs, and I was the only one awake, making sure the fire was totally out before heading to bed. So, I was the only one who saw it. In the ashes, for just a moment, I saw two eyes looking right at me. It's tough to describe exactly, but it appeared as if two eyeballs had formed in the coals, like they were still aflame, as though the eyes themselves were burning. They were there just for a second before the embers went back to normal. Probably something I should have written off, but in that moment I chalked it up to my tired mind playing tricks. That sounds familiar. A lot of cases I handle start out with small, almost ignorable things. Folks dismiss it as imagination. but they all escalate quickly. Let me guess, things got worse after that? Yes, unfortunately. The next thing involved our family photos. We take a lot of pride in capturing good family pictures, so we've got loads of them hanging throughout the house. I'm not sure how often we really look at them, though, so I couldn't say exactly when the damage started. But I know it was about a week after the fireplace incident when I first noticed something was off. Above the mantel, right over the fireplace, we keep 5 different pictures from various family outings. The one I noticed was taken during a trip to the zoo, actually in front of the monkey enclosure, but that's irrelevant. Point is, in that photo, all our eyes had been burned out. Tiny holes, maybe the size of cigarette burns, right where our eyes should be. Every one of us, my 3 kids, my wife, and me, all our eyes had been burned out. I was shocked when I saw it. I assumed they were cigarette burns, but neither my wife nor I smoke. So my initial panicked thought was that maybe my eldest daughter had started a secret habit. I was furious at first, but then logic set in. Even if she was smoking, that wouldn't explain why she'd go and burn out all our eyes. Then I glanced at the other photos on the mantel, same thing in each. That's when I realized it definitely wasn't the work of my daughter. In every photo in the house, the same pattern. Our eyes had been scorched away. Scorched photos. I've heard that before. I have to ask, though, was that the only property damage, or was there more? There was more. Over the next few days, the kids started noticing small scorch marks on our walls, scattered randomly throughout the house, always circular and about the size of a ping pong ball. They turned up in pairs, 2 tiny holes burned side by side. I knew there was no way a family member had done that with a cigarette. I'd guess, in those few days, between finding the first scorches and the moment we all saw him, we found maybe a dozen marks like that. What do you mean by when we all saw him? I mean exactly that. All of us laid eyes on him, the man with the flames in his eyes. Interesting. Go on. We were all gathered in the kitchen, saying grace before dinner. All of a sudden, I felt a sharp pain in my hand. When I looked, my skin was burning, literally blistering, and I caught a whiff of sizzling flesh. I screamed and jumped from my seat, shocking everyone else. I stood there, staring at my flaming hand in both agony and terror. Then I heard Maggie, my eldest, let out a shriek, which somehow snapped me back to reality. I looked up at her. She was pale as a sheet and pointing toward the far side of the kitchen. At the other end of the table, right behind my wife, stood a man staring at me, or rather, at my hand. Our eyes never met. His eyes weren't any normal color. They were blazing orange. They flickered like embers, almost as if an actual flame burned in his iris. When I looked at them, it was like staring straight into hell. A man with flame-filled eyes? Yes. Ask my wife, ask the kids. For God's sake, they all saw him, this man with burning eyes. All right, sir. Here's what happens now. If you want to pursue this claim, we'll assign an investigator to your property. He'll look for evidence of your alleged haunting, and he'll decide whether or not to grant your compensation. Do you understand? Yes. End of recording. Report for paranormal insurance. Case number 708. I've listened to the initial phone call regarding case number 708. I'm now fully aware of the events and the dollar amount Mr. Johnson is seeking. A thorough investigation will follow, documented below. My initial impression is that this claim may turn out to be fraudulent. I arrived at the Johnson residence on a Saturday morning at 10:34 a.m. I got out of my car, grabbed my briefcase from the passenger seat, and walked toward the house. The first thing I noticed was the property's size and beauty. I had to tip my head all the way back just to see the pointed top of the steep roof. The walls were done in a Victorian style, and the roof had light gray shingles. 4 columns supported a wide front porch that jutted from the main facade. I wouldn't call it awe-inspiring, but the place definitely looked expensive. From my vantage point, there was no visible damage outside, which was consistent with earlier descriptions. It seemed everything was happening indoors. A tall iron fence surrounded the yard, presumably to guard against external threats. The irony that their greatest threat was coming from within the house, not outside, didn't escape me. Right now, though, the biggest external threat they faced was me. The insurance investigator who might prove their story was a hoax and deny their claim. The gate automatically began to swing open, probably because the family noticed my arrival. In most cases like this, I'm greeted by someone who's either annoyed or distressed about having their claim scrutinized. They've gone through something traumatic, and the last thing they want is to keep reliving it for an investigator. But sometimes they're simply frustrated because they know it's only a matter of time before I prove the haunting to be nothing more than a scheme. I expected some hostility from Mr. Johnson and his family, assuming I was dealing with a con. Once the gate was fully open, I walked up the paved path to the front door. Waiting for me was a middle-aged man with short brown hair. He looked fairly unremarkable, dressed in casual slacks and a button-up shirt. The only odd thing was the dark sunglasses covering his face. It was a gloomy, overcast day, so there was no sunlight to shield against. He greeted me with a curt nod and a flat, "Good morning." I extended my hand in a more cordial way. He did the same, gripping my hand in return. I have to admit, though, my handshake was partly a test. As soon as he grasped my hand, I glanced down and saw 2 small scorch marks on his palm. They still looked fresh and blistered. I was almost startled by the sight of blackened skin. Either the man's claim was real, or he was going to extreme lengths to support a hoax. People in dire situations do surprising things. If you listen to that first phone recording, you may recall how the agent's tone shifted once the flame-eyed man was mentioned. You've also heard me express strong skepticism about this being a fraud. But if you're unfamiliar with the most notorious and potentially lucrative paranormal insurance claims, you won't know why this one already smells fishy. So, for the uninitiated, here's a quick explanation of why I suspected greed and deceit. About 5 years ago, there was another case with strikingly similar details. A haunted family, burned photographs, small scorch marks on walls, and sightings of a flame-eyed man. That case centered on a man named Jack Evans. He submitted a claim for damages, emotional, physical, and property, saying that he and some friends had done something foolish in their younger days. Something that allegedly drew this entity to him. Because there was no solid proof that any of it was real, it was deemed fraudulent, and no payout was made. Only after Evans' death was a substantial sum granted to his grieving family. Apparently, details from that case made the local papers. Soon enough, more folks cropped up with suspiciously similar hauntings, all claiming they, too, were tormented by the flame-eyed man. I assumed the Johnsons were part of that wave. Now that you're caught up, I'll continue with what happened to the Johnson family. After the handshake, I introduced myself, explaining my role and the fact that I needed to inspect the house to assess the claim. He nodded politely, though I was certain he already knew why I was there. He introduced himself as Max Johnson, then opened the door and led me inside his impressive home. We stepped into a long hallway with high ceilings. The wallpaper was an ornate forest green design, suiting the rustic charm of the property. The corridor was so long it felt more like a tunnel. The moment I crossed the threshold, I caught the faint smell of burnt wood and paper, just enough to register. You smell it too, don't you? The burning. Yeah, it definitely smells like something was on fire. Over there, see? That's where it started. Max pointed further along the hall, so I walked to where he gestured and saw what he meant. 2 small scorch marks on the wallpaper. I inspected the marks. Charred black circles close together. They looked not unlike cigarette burns. It could have been from someone actually stubbing out a cigarette, but I couldn't say for sure. Nor could they prove it wasn't. I turned back to Max. Despite the dim hallway, I could see that behind those shades he wore a look of defeat in his eyes. You'll find 4 more scorch marks further down. 3 more in the kitchen, God knows how many in the bedrooms. His voice was subdued, matching his weary expression. He might have been annoyed, but I still had to do my job. I'd like to speak with your whole family if possible. It helps me get the full picture, I told him politely. Sure, he responded. Not like you'll be here long, I guess. You've seen the scorch marks, and soon enough, you'll see the real damage that thing has done, and then you'll leave. His frustration was evident. He called out for his kids to come downstairs, his voice echoing in the big house. He then motioned me forward, and I followed him along the hallway, noticing more burned patches on the walls. There's another one, he said without stopping, pointing at another pair of scorch marks. I glanced over, seeing the same blackened circles. Then something else caught my eye. A row of 3 framed family photos. One showed everyone at the beach, another at an amusement park, and the last was a professional portrait. They all shared 2 characteristics. Each photo captured the 5 Johnsons smiling together, and in every single one, their eyes had been burned out. The photo paper around each spot was scorched, though the glass frame was perfectly intact. It's like that in every picture, Max said over his shoulder. I'm sure, I replied. He led me through a large doorway at the end of the hall and into a renovated modern kitchen. Across the room stood a long black dining table, around which sat 3 girls. 2 looked about 10 years old, and the eldest was in her mid-teens, as well as a woman in her 40s. Clearly his wife and children. I greeted them, set my briefcase on the table, and pulled out a small recorder. Is it all right if I ask you all a few questions and record your answers? They each nodded, somewhat reluctantly, and I started with my initial queries. Does anyone in the house smoke? Cigarettes, cigars, anything? All 3 girls shook their heads. Max shot me a glare, and his wife did likewise. For the record, that's a definite no, I said into the recorder, then continued. Has anyone conducted any sort of ritual or tried something supernatural? Ouija boards, seances, anything along those lines? The parents looked at their kids, who all shook their heads. Then the eldest, who I believe was called Grace, spoke up. No, of course not. In a house this old, we're not about to tempt fate with something like that. I understand, and I apologize if it's a rude question, but it's part of the process. Now, aside from what's already been described, the scorch marks, the burned-out eyes in the photos, and sightings of the flame-eyed man, has anything else strange happened? Any other unexplained incidents? The entire family offered a general no, except for the middle child, a girl named Jenna, who stayed silent, just staring straight ahead. So, everyone's certain there have been no other unusual occurrences. I made eye contact with Jenna as I spoke. She continued to stare, then finally found her voice. I found something in my room. Her tone was shaky and nervous. What do you mean, honey? Max asked, concerned. When that first burn mark appeared on my wall, I noticed something behind the wallpaper. I peeled a bit away, and there was more behind it. It was obvious this was the first time she'd told anyone about it. What did you see, sweetheart? Max asked again. I'll show you. We all stood from the table and followed her out of the kitchen, passing more eyeless family photos along the way. Jenna led us up the wooden stairs to her bedroom, pushing the door open. It looked like a typical girl's room: pink wallpaper, pink and white striped bedding, a small dollhouse in one corner. However, 5 pairs of circular scorch marks were scattered on the walls, and I noticed one more set burned into the white carpet. Saying nothing, Jenna quietly walked to the dollhouse and nudged it aside, revealing yet another burned spot. But what she truly exposed was a piece of wallpaper she'd peeled away. Behind that torn wallpaper, scrawled right onto the wood, were more scorch marks. But these weren't the same small circles. Instead, the burns formed words. "The friends of the flame call your name. Show us what you have seen." Below those thick, charred letters were additional, smaller names burned into the wood, one after another. Sarah Brown, Sonia Collins, Jack Evans, Daniel Ember. "I've never seen this before," Max muttered, sounding shocked. "But I have heard about the Friends of the Flame." "And I've heard about Jack Evans," I said, equally taken aback by the discovery. This was my first genuine piece of evidence that the Johnsons' story might be authentic. Yet it was no relief. If anything, it spelled danger for them. Only once before had a claim involving this so-called flame-eyed man resulted in a payout. That was for the late Jack Evans' family after he died. He was found alone in his home, his eyes gouged out, and his empty sockets burned, meaning they burned them after removing the eyes. It was a horrific end, and not one I'd wish on anybody. But I had a growing suspicion that might be the Johnsons' inevitable fate, too. Nonetheless, the words scorched into the wall were enough for me to believe the haunting was real, and enough evidence to justify a payout. "Do you mind if I take a photograph of this? It'll greatly improve your chances of receiving compensation," I asked. Max didn't reply, just stared at the wall through his dark glasses, lips moving silently as if repeating the phrase, "Show us what you have seen." His wife, however, nodded in agreement. I reached into my briefcase for a small Polaroid camera, aimed, and took a shot. The camera flashed and whirred, spitting out the developing print. I waved it a bit, watching the image slowly emerge in color. Then I had another idea. Possibly I could secure more irrefutable proof. "Do you mind if I take a quick family photo of all of you? It could be important." "What for?" Max asked warily. "Trust me." They exchanged doubtful looks, but eventually huddled together in the middle of the room. No smiles, just fearful eyes. I snapped the picture. The Polaroid spat out a bright flash, reflecting sharply off Max's sunglasses. Then the little photo slid from the camera. It looked normal at first, but as it developed, I saw 10 tiny holes appear, perfectly aligned with each set of eyes in the frame. The color seeped in around those holes, so you could see their faces with empty, burned spaces where their eyes should be. That was all the evidence I needed to confirm the legitimacy of this haunting. Between the writing on the wall and this brand new Polaroid, there was no denying it. "Well," I told them, "I can confirm this haunting is legitimate and you'll receive the sum you requested." For the briefest moment, Max's exhausted, brooding expression lightened into a faint smile. "I just need to assess all the damage around the house to confirm the amount, but I'm pretty sure it'll match your claim." I spent the next few hours documenting each instance of damage: burned walls, destroyed photos, and more. Everything lined up with the Johnsons' story. They would indeed receive the compensation they were seeking. When I finished, I thanked the children for their time and thanked Jenna for showing us what she'd discovered. Max shook my hand. "Thanks for coming. Let me walk you out." We went back through the hall, out to the porch. He paused at the top step, then turned to me. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said quietly, "and I haven't told my wife or kids yet." I studied his face, waiting for him to continue. I've seen the man with the burning eyes again since that night at dinner. I told the guy on the phone I'd only seen him once, but it's been 3 more times now, he said, undoing the top buttons of his shirt. Pulling the fabric aside, he revealed more blistered burns, 2 pairs of small circles on his chest and neck. Then, almost reluctantly, he slid the sunglasses from his face, showing singed skin around his bloodshot eyes. "I saw him early this morning. We made eye contact. His voice shook with fear. He showed me things. The second he locked eyes with me and those flames hit, he showed me. He showed me these pits of fire, a ground soaked in blood. I felt the heat, so intense, and heard screaming everywhere. That's all I could hear. He showed me hell." He paused, swallowing hard as if the memory was choking him. I could feel flames licking all over my body, burning me but not killing me. I felt like I was melting, but I wasn't dying. These creatures, demons maybe, or damned souls, gathered around me, laughing, dancing, totally charred and shriveled as if they'd burned for all eternity but still couldn't die. He didn't just show me some vision of hell, though. No, he showed me what's waiting for me. He showed me my future. He trailed off, face pale. I wanted to tear my eyes out just to make it stop. Honest to God, I was wishing he'd burn out my eyes so I wouldn't have to see it anymore. In that moment, I felt real fear for the first time in my entire career. The haunting was genuine. I sensed a desperate urge to leave the house immediately. My heart pounded, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I could almost feel someone watching me from behind. I had no intention of telling him about Jack Evans and how it ended for him. Perhaps Max Johnson already knew or had guessed what fate might be in store. Maybe he just wanted to secure some money for his family before the inevitable caught up with him. So, I've attached the Polaroids to this report as evidence, and in my professional opinion, this family is truly being terrorized by an evil entity. I recommend we award them the full amount, and fast, before it's too late.